Yeah, it's funny. Even looking at the takes right now.
Welcome, one and all, to the Draft Savages NFL Draft Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Cox. With me tonight, my co-host, Justin Higdon. Talking about hot takes already. What's uh, Yes, the hot takes are already flowing, Justin, for the fantasy football world for the 2015 NFL Draft.
We've got fantasy takes that are hot. We've got 2016 smoking hot takes already. I mean, Scooby Wright apparently just somehow he accumulated a mass amount of sacks, tackles for loss, and a Big 12 or Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year award all by accident because he's just not athletic.
Well, we'll get to that too. And our guest tonight is the one and only Kyle Posey. Kyle, how are you tonight?
I'm doing well, guys. How are you?
Can't complain. Just enjoying the evening. Uh, I have to stay inside because it's like 115 outside in Arizona. So if I go outside, I might burst into flames. So um, and we're gonna get together tonight, of course, to continue on the Why Your Scouting Sucks. Um, the This will be our third episode of that. We've looked at why our scouting on Draft Savages sucks. Justin, Justice, and I took a look at some of our just terrible opinions. Um, Last week we had Eric Stoner on, and he discussed why his scouting sucks, what he's learned, where he's grown, and where he's still stubborn. And this week, um, because Kyle is like myself, and we don't believe in writing things down or keeping old things around, we're going to discuss why some of the bigger names scouting sucks. Going to go talk about guys that that have made it in the business. So this, comes off as sour grapes. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. Whatever. But we're just gonna have some fun with it. Hindsight's always fun to look at, and to look back at this 2012 draft and kind of see what some of the takes were will be quite enjoyable. So we'll start with I guess, the godfather of the NFL draft, scouting online, all that good stuff. ESPN's Mel Kiper, and right off the bat with Mel, I think the first thing you see is he uh, he obviously leans on his sources very well because he moves guys. You can go back and look at like his December or um, you know, pre 2012 big board and how it changes to his final big board of 2012 is quite interesting, and that's one of the things that I noticed. Obviously, Robert Griffin going all the way up to number 2 that year, but the one I want to start with, and this is one of the reasons we have Kyle on, is because Kyle is was a large Morris Claiborne fan, and Mel had Morris at 4. I think that was pretty consensus-like at the time, that Morris was the next shutdown corner. Um, why did everybody miss on him, Kyle?
That's a really good question. I really don't know because I mean Kuiper said he's a true technician. That's something that I noticed too. Like I just noticed that one of the things with corners, man, something that they have to be is very, very patient. So you can't fall for like those first moves, those first head fakes. And Claiborne didn't do that. And he also had ball skills. Like he made plays when the ball was thrown his way. It's like I noticed that even just like Chargers corners, just corners that they play in general, like they don't get their head around to find the ball, and that's something that he did. So just like little things like that, I feel like he did everything. So I really don't know what went wrong. I really wish I did, but I don't know what went wrong. What do you guys think?
I think one thing that I noticed was that Claiborne came in a lot smaller than what he was, well, significantly smaller than what he was listed at LSU. You look at what he actually measured as under 190 pounds, 5'11", and a little bit of change. And when you apply his athletic testing to a guy that small, it really isn't anything that spectacular. So, I've come to understand that that's probably not always like really, really important to have a really sparky type of cornerback like Seattle likes. Not every system is going to have guys like that. For example, like last year, Kwan Williams as a rookie played really well for Cleveland. He's not a guy who would test well in that spark type of athletic testing. Claiborne's kind of like a tick above that as far as how he tested. But when you're talking about the difference between a guy you can find as an undrafted rookie who plays very well, and then a guy that was taken, I think, 6 overall, and where Dallas actually traded up into the top 10 to make that pick, that's where you see where the cost effectiveness and values that we put on players, kind of where those things just contradict each other. And I've talked about this before, but you're talking about a guy from LSU following up a Patrick Peterson, and you're paying that stiff SEC tax, and that's why Claiborne, I think, I think a lot of us, including myself, got caught up with him being the next LSU corner at a time when LSU corners seem to be more successful for whatever reason.
And like looking back at his combine, like he ran a 4.5 flat, and at that size, and he jumped 34.5 inches. So I mean, you probably would expect him to be, or just expect him to be more explosive, just the way that he was talked about. Because you watched him, and he never really got beat deep. And scouting reports said that he had track speed. So I mean, the combine probably should have told us a little something about his explosiveness.
Yeah, and also he's a guy who I don't think at his pro day or combine ever did the bench press. That's an indicator, not a real indicator of success down the road, but it is an indicator of guys who don't really love the weight room. And then you look at his, you mentioned his vertical. He had a sub 10-foot broad jump, which for cornerbacks, most of them, the average will be around 10 feet or even over that. So he's coming in under that. That shows a lack of lower body strength, so that could give you an indication where he's going to maybe struggle against some of these bigger, stronger receivers at an outside corner position.
Yeah, I think I just wish we all knew now about this whole numbers stuff, the numbers game, what we would have known back then.
Yeah, one of the things that we've talked about before on the show and off the show is just kind of how things have changed, how attitudes have changed in the past 5 years, because at that time, I can still remember watching the combine prior to that draft, and people were pretty adamant that the combine didn't matter, that 95% or some other arbitrary high number was based on film. And now you go along, the more you follow this, and the more I realize that I don't know, and I'm trying to still learn about football. The more I realize that I can't possibly put 95% of my stock into just what I see, at least not without asking questions and without combining other attributes.
And when I talk about the universality of people liking Mo Claiborne, just pulling up some old rankings, like I said, Kuiper had him 4, Josh Norris had him 3, Russ Landy had him 3. Do you have the CBS? Is that who you had up, Kyle?
I know Mayock has him 4, and CBS has him 5.
Yeah, so I mean, you're talking basically a top 5 talent universally, and so I think a lot of times what happens, I'm guilty of it, especially when I first started, is you see what guys like Kuiper, McShay, even Mayock, those guys say, and you kind of follow suit. Like, all right, if they have Mo Claiborne that high, there's a reason for it, right? Like, and if it's a universal thing, there's a reason for it. So, I think what it does is it makes you have to take a look back at what you want to figure out what you actually saw and why you were wrong, as opposed to just saying, well, look, everybody was wrong, so it's no big deal, because that probably had a little something to do with the fact of why you were comfortable rating him that high as well. One I wanted to talk about last week, and I just completely spaced it with Eric, because he had Justin Blackmon rated, I want to say in the 30s or the low 20s. He wasn't a fan. You go to these ones, like I said, I got Kuiper, he has him at 5. Landy has him at 6. Josh Norris has him much lower. I mean, not much lower, but 19. Here's my question. The on-field talent of Justin Blackmon, can you call that a miss? Kyle, what do you think?
I don't know if you can because, I mean, I feel like he was like the contested catch guy that, would just go up and get it. Like, he was with Whedon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that wasn't like because I don't think that he ran very fast. I want to say that people were like comparing him to like the Anquan Bolton type guy that he's just going to be like a super possession receiver that's just going to catch anything you throw his way. It doesn't matter if he's covered.
Yeah, and I know that he was also being compared at that time to Michael Crabtree, who was pretty highly regarded himself coming out of college, and we hadn't yet seen the years of Crabtree being kind of decimated by injuries and maybe not being as special as we might have initially thought. So when you factor that in, Blackmon was a player. I don't think remember a couple of years ago when he came off his suspension, he just had like 4 really outstanding games. He just really looked like the player that people thought he was, or at least that he could be that type of player. And he's just been completely derailed by his off-the-field stuff. And now you see pictures of him looking like he hasn't been working out. You hear stories about how I think it was Tampa Bay, right? They sent scouts. They sent a scout to just hang out at a bar in Oklahoma State and just kind of wait for Justin Blackmon to wander in on weeknights. So that's probably, I personally don't, when I was that age, I was probably spending a lot of weeknights in a bar too, but I wasn't getting ready for the NFL draft.
Yeah, I think the thing that might have held him back is he was never like super quick. Like I don't remember what his 40 time was. He probably ran like okay in a straight line, but he was never really a guy that could gain separation, and that might have been something that held him back on the field.
Yeah, Blackmon at 207, he came in a shade under 6'1". At 207, he ran 4.46, I think was his pro day time. And then kind of along the same lines as Claiborne, where his jumps were right in that average range for a guy his size. 3-cone was 7.13, which isn't bad, but you see some of these upper echelon receivers that are coming in under 7 seconds there. The 4.38 shuttle, almost the same as his 40, so that shows you some stiffness when you look back on it. And he really kind of comes out as more of a day 2 type of receiver than as a top 5 pick, which is where he went.
And wasn't he like a strider too? I feel like he was a long strider for some reason. So
long strider and not all that tall of a guy.
Yeah.
The next guy I wanted to bring up is in your backyard, Kyle. Melvin Ingram, another universal kind of top 10 guy on a lot of boards. I can say this, and you talk to any Cardinals fan and they can vouch for me on this. I was not an Ingram fan. I wanted nothing to do with Ingram at the time. At the time, I didn't know why. Like, I couldn't explain it. I just didn't like the idea of a guy that won a lot of his pass rushing battles, from like that inside position where he lined up in South Carolina, and everybody talked about his versatility and like moving all over the field, and I'm like, well, that's not really going to happen in the NFL. So like, what does he do as an edge player, defensive end at the time? So, has it just been injuries, or when he's healthy, he hasn't been very good in San Diego, right, Kyle?
Yeah, it definitely hasn't just been injuries. And what you said is exactly what he still is. I don't know how much he's progressed as a player. I mean, when people say versatility, that implies that you can win outside and inside. And Melvin, out of college, he just won heavily, like as you said, like a D tackle. So like he would whip a guard just by out athleting him. But as far as a tackle, like he can't bend the edge, so he's not going to run around the corner around the tackle. And I mean, now with after the ACL injury, he actually does have a little more explosiveness. So I mean, he's doing a little better job of that. But like as far as handwork or just like layered moves or different sort of pass rush moves, that's not his thing. Like he's still more of a one-dimensional type pass rusher that will beat you with athleticism. And generally, his best pass rushes are still when he's either winning to the inside with quickness or lined up as like a D tackle in like a nickel situation.
What did the Spark score say about Ingram?
About Melvin Ingram, let's take a look. He actually tests out pretty well because of his bulk. At 260 pounds, 260 plus pounds, and he comes in under a 4.8. He had a really pretty strong bench press. His jumps were pretty solid, and then he had really, really high agility scores for a guy at 260. I talked about Blackman coming in at 7.1 at 207 pounds. Ingram comes in at 6.83 at 264 pounds. So, but I think, Kyle touches on this. When we talk about players, and this is something I've come to devalue players who, and we talked about this with Deion Jordan a few weeks ago, players who don't seem to have a home at the college position or at the college level as far as positions go. Like, you want a player that you can see translating into a professional role. And we know that there may be some ways that coaches could be more creative and devise some kind of roles for these guys that they don't do for whatever reason. But the fact remains that they don't do it. So we've got to try and look for players. I think, I tend to look more for players who can fit roles that already exist rather than players who I'm going to have to get really creative, because there might be 2 or 3 coaches in the league that are willing to risk their jobs or risk wins and losses based on being creative and experimenting in the lab. That's just not happening at a high enough level for us to take these leaps and try and project these kind of Swiss Army knife type players.
One of the things that was popular at this draft were running backs still. People still liked running backs. It was amazing. 4 years ago, we still liked running backs. I think this was the last draft that we actually liked running backs.
Trent Richardson killed it for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Josh Norris had Trent Richardson 4. Doug Martin 16. Sorry, just scrolling through here. His number 3 running back was Chris Polk. I'm trying to find where he had him. Hold on.
I see him at 41 overall on Josh's rankings.
Yeah, 41. To coincide with that, Russ Landy had Polk fairly high as well. He had him at 38. Is a guy that hasn't gotten on the field because of, one, he was in Philadelphia behind, LaShawn McCoy, and then he had injury issues. And then I don't even know where he's at now, to be completely honest. So if you guys know, you can pipe in. But as a guy that hasn't gotten on the field because of injuries and circumstances, is that a miss, or is it just lack of opportunity right now, Kyle?
Well, he plays for the Texans. I think he just got signed by the Texans. But, can you, as a running back, knowing that you're going to get opportunities, because I feel like we see every team, every season, somebody pops up. Somebody random pops up. The Broncos just had whatever, I forget what his name is now, but, he just led the team in rushing.
C.J. Anderson.
Yeah, C.J. Anderson. The Panthers had D'Angelo Williams, and then Jonathan Stewart came along, so they split carries. So if Polk was that good, wouldn't he have gotten an opportunity? If he showed out in practice? So I don't know if you can say that it's because of depth, even though they did have LaShawn McCoy. I didn't really watch Polk, so I can't really say, but I do know that a lot of people had him top 50. So I guess I don't know where he lacked at, but I mean, there's a reason that whatever it is, there's some reason that he wasn't on the field.
Yeah, I want to talk about this briefly here because we start to see this, with prospects. We see this with prospects every year, and it was on the Roto Underworld podcast, which is a fantasy football podcast that I've been listening to, and he talked about the host Matt Kelly. He talked about how evaluators who specifically really rely on tape without factoring in stats and other metrics, tend to fall in love with these big backs that break a lot of tackles at the college level, and then kind of don't factor in their actual yards per carry. And I agree with Matt in this respect. I think collegiate yards per carry is an incredibly important indicator of success for running backs, and that's something I didn't look at back then. I couldn't tell you what Polk's yards per carry were at Washington, but I'm guessing just based on what I remember of watching his tape and his running style that I was falling in love with a guy who I had him at 55, by the way, that I was falling in love with a guy who's kind of a bruising style back and who's breaking tackles at the college level. Now, we know now that Polk went undrafted because he had some kind of injury issue, including a shoulder issue. That's the type of thing that happens from taking a beating from running between the tackles and not being a very shifty, elusive guy. So that's something that I really look for going forward when I'm looking at backs. Is I want to see, do they look like they can make people miss rather than trying to run people over? And that's one of the reasons why I'm not going to like Devontae Booker as much as some guys are going to heading into this season. Booker's a player in the Pac-12 who's, I think, right around 5 yards per carry, and Utah's going to run that guy into the ground this year. He's probably going to be right around 5 yards per carry again, and he's going to take a pounding. And I think people are going to – I'm projecting right now that people are going to overrate Devontae Booker, and it's because of the things that we're talking about right here.
Now, when you talk about that, does that make you worry that you'll miss on guys like Le'Veon Bell sometimes?
I mean, yeah, that is a concern. You have to factor in other things, though, and one of the reasons why I think I should have liked Bell more is that he was pretty elusive for a big back. When you look at his agility testing, and the other thing that you have to love about Le'Veon Bell, and that it was right there in front of us all, was his contributions in the passing game.
Yeah.
The Steelers are using him exactly how they should be using him, and he's managed to trim some weight and add a little bit of shiftiness to a guy who's already fairly shifty at 240 pounds in college. So, I think Le'Veon Bell's a guy that I kicked myself about because I liked him quite a bit, and I think I just kind of watched too much of him to the point where I just gradually soured on him enough to get him into the 4th round. And I it's something I regret, and I would probably look at him differently today.
One of the guys that all three evaluators I'm looking at really liked was Cordy Glenn of Georgia. Cordy Glenn ended up going 41 to Buffalo, and he's been good, probably really good. What do you guys say? Left tackle in the NFL. I mean, I think he's surprised everybody how good he's been at left tackle. And so the question on this is, and this isn't to take away anything from these guys, but Josh Norris had Cordy Glenn rated 20. Russ Landy had him rated 13, or excuse me, 12. And Kuiper had him in his top 15, I want to say. He had him 14. Now, my question is this. They all rated him as a guard. So how do how do you evaluate that? Does that just mean that they got the player evaluation right, that he was going to be successful at the next level, or was the fact that they've all graded him so highly as a guard, does that take something away from the fact that they missed, a guy that might be the best left tackle in the class?
I mean, don't you have to kind of take that away because wasn't he was considered an athletic guy that can get to his spots, right? Like as far as I remember him, like so he was at Georgia, he could get to his spots. I don't remember him being able to, or I don't remember him having issues, just moving. So I don't know, maybe I'm way off, but I guess if you have a successful player and he's successful at a different position than what you said he was going to be, like you can't take credit for that.
I'm going to disagree. I think that you can take some credit for that because of the different types of coaching that guys get at the pro level. I would have probably – I'm looking at Cordy Glenn. I had him listed at offensive tackle. Now looking at his general athleticism and his size at 345 pounds, he looks like a guard. But then let's talk about another guy who does a lot of metrics on Twitter for draft, and that's Jim Coburn. And his system will tell you that taller tackles are the ones that are projecting and having a lot of success. Here's Cordy Glenn with the long arms. He's at over 6'5" and a half, 6'5" and 3/4 that year. So he's a tall guy. The arm length we're finding out is kind of overrated, but you still want guys that are 33, 34-inch arms playing tackle. Glenn's there. I would have probably, looking back, if he had come out this year, I probably would have ranked him as a guard. But I did recognize that he had the body to play tackle. I thought he needed to be a little quicker on his feet. At that time, I wasn't sure that he could do that. But if you have some other athletic guys next to you that can kind of compensate for your lack of agility, you can end up being a pretty good tackle because your size, strength, your height, and your strength. And that's why I wouldn't knock those guys for having listing him as a guard unless they flat out said in their analysis, in their scouting report, there's no way in hell this guy can play tackle. He's strictly a guard. And I don't have their scouting reports in front of me, but my guess is that they would say something like Glenn could be a solid right tackle, but might be best fit at guard. If that's the case, it's still not a slam dunk hit, but I'll give him credit for ranking him pretty highly. I think I had him in a top 20 as well, just because he did do a really dominant job at a SEC school and against some pretty talented pass rushers.
No, I definitely see where you're coming from. I'm just saying, like, I'm trying to think of an example, like a receiver, basically. Like if you say, he's going to be a great possession receiver, and he turns out to be like a deep threat, like do you understand like where I'm coming from too?
Oh yeah, and I think that's a good point, and I think a guy that we're going to see that type of analysis emerge in the next year or two is going to be Jarvis Landry, because I remember takes that Jarvis Landry was better than Odell Beckham, and even after he ran a really slow 40 time and a not so fast 40 time at his pro day and really tested out on the poor end athletically, he ends up projecting more as a professional at flanker. He's getting under 10 yards per catch, and he's not going to be that deep threat no matter how much people want him to be. And on the flip side, Odell Beckham is. Now, Jarvis Landry could end up having a really good career, but he's not going to be he's probably going to be like an 11-yard per catch, maybe 12-yard per catch guy at his best. And he's probably not going to go beyond that. So that's, for receivers, I definitely think that's a good point. And if you're going to say like a guy flat out can't do certain things and then he goes to the pros and then does those things, then yeah, your evaluation was off.
the next guy I wanted to look at on this one, and we could end here if you guys have a couple guys you wanted to comb through. Your boy, Justin, Brandon Whedon. Um,
Yeah, let's
20,
talk about Brandon Whedon because I took a lot of guff for saying that Brandon Whedon was never going to develop into a starting quarterback.
so Russ Landy had him at 28. Um, Josh Norris had him. I thought it was higher. Hold on, maybe it is higher. I can't read sometimes, so
Let's see. I've got
had him at
Josh
14.
on at 14. Yep.
Yeah, so we're talking first round grades from two guys. I'm not sure where Todd or Mel had him. What did people see?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, he was. People would kill him today for being in a system. They would kill him for the system he was in. He didn't take any. He didn't take any snaps under center. He had a terrible Senior Bowl, which is something that some people put a ton of stock into, an ungodly amount of stock into in some cases. And he was 20. He turned 29 years old midway through October of his freshman year. There were so many terrible Whedon takes, and I don't remember who these came from specifically, but takes about, and I'm sure more than one person said these things. There were things like he doesn't have a lot of wear and tear because he spent time as a professional baseball player. He already was an experienced professional athlete because of his time playing baseball. Age wasn't an issue because it's a quarterback, and we're talking about a player that doesn't have to be a high-end athlete. All of these takes are terrible. They would never fly today, and yet they were accepted to the point where it was a lot of respected people that we're talking about right now had Brandon Whedon ranked highly. And I will tell you, as soon as the Browns picked Brandon Whedon, and this is what pisses me off most about this, as soon as they picked Brandon Whedon, everybody hid from that evaluation. There's nobody who was out there pounding the table and saying, that hey, this guy's going to turn it around. The second he got trapped under that flag on opening day, it was as if he never existed as a college prospect, and the Browns were just dumb for picking him. And that just annoyed the hell out of me.
Funny how that works. Well, I'm trying to think back of like Whedon as a player, and I feel like he did show good velocity towards like the intermediate part of the field, even though it wasn't a system, so routes weren't as covered as they probably would be in a quote unquote pro style system. He had good arm strength, he had good velocity towards the intermediate part of the field. Was his accuracy that bad?
It wasn't that bad. It wasn't that bad at all out of that system. But when he was asked to do some more pro style, I say that in quotes, type of things during the Senior Bowl, and without running his offense at the Senior Bowl, he was way off, and he didn't even look like he had that strong of an arm.
Yeah.
The last thing I'll end with, and like I said, if you guys want to jump in with anything, feel free. I see a lot of guys, and I was guilty of it last year's draft, that I think they take a quarterback and they rank them in their top 100 on the off chance that they turn out big, right? And then, but they never really have to answer for why. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So and mine was Logan Thomas. I ranked Logan Thomas 100. That was probably about 50 to 200 spots too high. Thomas probably should have been an undraftable grade. I think I weighed too much on his sophomore tape and the fact that he had like 13 different offensive coordinators in the 2 years that he played, or 3 years that he played at Virginia Tech, and all that, all that good stuff that we use for excuses when we miss somebody, right? I just don't think I paid enough attention to the fact that dude really couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, right? So when you
Yeah, but he never grew up from that sophomore year that you mentioned.
exactly, and in fact, he probably regressed. I mean, like if we're being honest, like he didn't. He not only didn't get better, he got worse. So, but Russ had Ryan Lindley. He of the terrible quarterback performance in the preseason, or sorry, in the playoffs. Preseason would have been fine. And against the Carolina Panthers, he had him ranked 92. And then Josh did something similar. He had B.J. Coleman, of formerly of the Arizona Rattlers, B.J. Coleman, ranked 98. Is this something that people do just in case, so they can be like, look back. I thought Ryan Lindley was a top 100 player, and by God, I was right.
I don't even know how to answer that question. I mean, the one quarterback that everybody brings up is Russell Wilson. And I think we all can just, I mean, if you go back and just watch him, like, there's not much he did wrong at NC State or Wisconsin. I mean, that was out of his control, anyways. Like, I feel like a lot of what he's doing now in the NFL is what he did in college. But as far as these other guys like Lindley, like, I feel like he's always had a noodle arm, and I don't even know who Coleman is. So I don't know where that came from, but I definitely think it's about looking back and seeing, like, if the guy does get a chance to start and he has a couple good games, you can kind of pat yourself on the back for it. Like Bonner this year, if he would have made a team, and let's say that he had a great preseason, so there would have been like so many I told you so's flying around. But he's not even on a roster right now. And like, so how many, like, we're not hearing anything about that right now.
No, yeah. Tom Savage was getting some of that love. I think most of Twitter hated Tom Savage, but I made the terrible, terrible mistake of thinking that Russell Wilson was just not going to be good because of his height, and that he was just going to be a backup quarterback because he wasn't going to get an opportunity. I had him pretty low, embarrassingly below. I had him below Ryan Lindley, who I thought had a good arm and made some really wow type of throws. The problem was Lindley had zero accuracy, and at the time I was totally buying into things like stats don't matter. And I totally disagree with that take now. I think stats do matter, and I think completion percentage is one of those stats, especially when you measure the completion percentage against yards per attempt and yards per completion. That'll give you an idea of how if a quarterback's taking shots down the field or throwing a lot of wide receiver screens. That's going to come out in those numbers. Lindley would have come out with a terrible completion percentage. He would have had a pretty good, pretty solid yards per completion, but it wouldn't have balanced out, and he would have probably been an undraftable player, much in the same way Bonner was this year. And Bonner kind of reminded me of Lindley, maybe with a little bit quicker feet. But interesting thing about Lindley is I saw some of the same people that liked Lindley liked Zach Mettenberger, and one of those guys prominently, and a guy who's considered a tape expert and a quarterback expert in many ways, is Greg Cosell. He loved Ryan Lindley. He called him the draft's most intriguing quarterback, and then he followed up last year in 2014 ranking Mettenberger very highly. And even in preseason last year, I remember listening to the Ross Tucker podcast, and Cosell was gushing about Mettenberger. So this goes to kind of what you guys were saying. You want to there's some element of wanting to be a firster or being right about a guy who might surprise because he has one trait, one attribute, in this case maybe two, like height and arm strength. And then part of it is just guys having a type and not admitting it. And at that time, certainly my type was not short guys, and that's why I totally blew it and putting Russell Wilson in like a 5th round, and it looks idiotic today.
Yeah, I think guys have a type and they stick to their draft takes. Like in Cassell's case, like with the Mettenberger, like I watched a lot of Mettenberger just off Landry and Beckham, and he missed those two so much.
He almost killed him.
Yeah, and I couldn't like fathom how you could watch him and think, oh, this is a franchise guy. And I mean, he went in the 6th round because there are obvious off-field issues, but I don't know where Cassell got that from. But I mean, to kind of, I guess, to take a little dig at Cassell while we're here, going back to Russell Wilson, he actually compared him to Seneca Wallace coming out, and that turned out pretty good.
Well, Seneca Wallace was a very good thrower of the football.
Wasn't it? Who was it that said something about Met? They liked Met over one of the top picks last year, or was it this year? Somebody say they liked Met over Jameis this offseason?
Probably.
I gotta start writing this stuff down. But yeah, I'm just always curious what people think. Like I said, I was guilty of it last year. Like, there's probably no good reason for me to rank Logan Thomas that high, other than the fact that I had it on good authority the Cardinals were going to take him. So,
and that Bruce Arians is some magician with big-armed quarterbacks, right?
But I mean, like, not really.
Right, they have to have some talent to go along with it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he's a magician, but there has to be the ability to play the position too. Like, that was one of the, not to get too much of a tangent, but that was one of the funniest parts about the whole Ryan Lindley thing when they brought Lindley back, and everybody that wanted to buy into Lindley as the quarterback that was going to lead the Cardinals on this magnificent playoff run, their whole reasoning was, well, he's being coached now by Bruce Arians and not Ken Wisner. So since Bruce Arians is coaching him, he's going to be so much better. And I'm like, that's, I'm not going to argue that Bruce is a better coach than Ken Wisenhunt, but I will fight you to the death about the fact that just Ryan Lindley didn't have the talent. Like, he got so many chances in the NFL and never proved it. He was then cut for Logan Thomas, who,
who's going to get cut this year.
Yeah. like the guy is one of the most genuinely good people I have ever had the privilege of covering. Like, every person that's ever talked to him gushes about how great of a person he is. But that doesn't mean you're good at football. And the other thing is, a coach, as much as you can make chicken salad out of chicken shit, you can't at the quarterback position. You just can't. Like, there's no covering up bad quarterback play. And then when you get to the playoffs and you play a team like the Carolina Panthers, they will absolutely destroy a bad quarterback. And that's what happened. So, all right, sorry. I had to rant on that.
No, but I wanted to build off that real quickly. One of the things that one of the ways I've drifted when it comes to quarterbacks now is that I'm looking at, if you're not good enough to be drafted in the first couple of rounds, you're probably not going to be a starting quarterback. Then do you draft a player in the 3rd or 4th round who you hope can emerge as, let's say 4th, 5th round, because 3rd round's still kind of, day 2, maybe fringe starter territory, but say 4th, 5th round, you draft a guy in the hopes that maybe you catch lightning in a bottle, or like the once in a 20-year Tom Brady type of thing, or that he might be a decent backup. And I said this last year, I don't think you waste a pick at that point, and I think you just wait till undrafted free agency, or maybe the 7th round, to snag a guy who you think you would want in undrafted free agency. And I would tend to drift more toward these guys who are distributors and who get rid of the ball quickly, heady guys who maybe don't have a lot of talent. If I'm going to take that 7th round, not talent, but not physical tools, guys who distribute, guys who get the ball quickly, heady guys with high completion percentage, and take a guy like that in the 7th round or as an undrafted free agent, maybe hope to develop a player like that, because I don't think you have a lot of hope of finding your quarterback after the early stage of the 3rd round at the latest.
And in the 4th and 5th round, instead of taking one of these quarterbacks who you aren't sure of, why wouldn't you just take a guy that runs like a 4.3 or has like a 40-inch vertical jump, like that sort of thing? Just take a project at a premier position besides quarterback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you can get a player like Martavis Bryant in the 4th round, and he ends up scoring 8 touchdowns as a rookie. He's looked at as a raw receiver, but he's got that deep threat ability, that height and speed, and that turns out to be an excellent pick. Or you take the Seahawks do it all the time, taking, they might take a defensive lineman in the 6th round that they want to move to guard. That's their project type of thing, and it works out better than taking a quarterback, to be honest.
Yeah, Bryant's a great example. That's a perfect example.
Seth's on mute.
Oh, I just muted myself instead of. Jeez. Anything else before we get out of here?
I mean, I don't think so. Just looking back, some guys that I probably missed on. I mean, I touched on Morris Claiborne. I'm trying to think of other guys that I really, really missed on in that class. I really wish I would have wrote it down. What were some big guys that everybody, the consensus was? So, Trent Richardson. I'm sure you guys touched on that.
Yeah,
I guess guys that I didn't see with that people had high. I never saw it with Nick Perry. He just did not seem like a guy that would transition well. I don't remember, how well did he test?
Nick Perry tested pretty well, but that's a player who I think falls into that tweener category that I was talking about. He's just under 6'3", so he's 271 pounds, and there was a lot of debate. Is he a defensive end? Is he a linebacker? I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent here, but this is kind of one of the things I've discussed with other people about calling players edge now instead of defensive end or linebacker. Really, when you're talking about defensive end, you're talking about a player who's not going to drop into pass coverage. He's going to be playing on the line of scrimmage, either rushing to pass or playing the run. You don't want that guy dropping the coverage. So if you're trying to draft a guy like Nick Perry and turn him into a linebacker where he has any type of drop and cover responsibilities, you're going to have a bad time with that. And I think they just have struggled with where to put him, and he's struggled with injuries.
Yeah, and I don't know that there was an Alabama player besides Trent Richardson that I liked. I didn't like Upshaw, didn't like Kirkpatrick. Thought it was a joke that Barron was being talked about where he was, and I was very surprised that he even went that high. I don't even know if I just mentioned Kirkpatrick. I didn't get a chance to watch Fletcher Cox. But I've watched him as the Eagles, and he seems like, I guess it's not surprising the way he plays. How did you guys feel about Fletcher Cox?
I liked Fletcher, but I'm always pro athletic defensive lineman. Like I prefer guys that can move a little bit and like make plays in the backfield as opposed to guys that just kind of make plays at the line of scrimmage. Because I'm always worried when they get to the NFL that line of scrimmage is going to change from 2 yards in the backfield where they're making a play to like 2 yards off the ball that they're making play. So then if you're making play 1 to 2 yards off the ball in college, then you're going to start making plays 4 to 5 yards down the field in the NFL because you're getting blocked that far. So that's always my worry. So Cox. And Eric Stoner hit on it last week. Fletcher Cox's Alabama game was probably one of the greatest like single draft breakdown games that you'll ever watch if for a defensive lineman. Like if you've never watched it, just go watch that game and you'll be like, how is this guy not a top 5 pick? Like that it was kind of like Gerald McCoy and Ndamukong Suh like talent domination there.
I also think I really liked the Arkansas receivers. Joe Adams, really liked him, and I like Greg Childs a lot too. So that worked out really well for me.
Childs was one of those guys where he just really had no knees left by the time he got to the pros.
A big fan. I was a big fan of So Duke Johnson's my number 1 running back in this class, and just going back, I feel like, in that class, I was a big fan of like Lamar Miller, and I also like David Wilson too. It's too bad that he didn't get a chance to, stay healthy and stick it out with football. But
sticking with running backs, one of the guys, and I don't think we've talked about him on any of these shows yet. He was a high draft pick, and I just didn't get it. He seemed more like a mid-round guy to me, and he just completely washed out. And that's Isaiah Peed from Cincinnati. Really smallish guy who didn't he didn't test very well. At 197 pounds, he did run a sub 4.5 40, but it was barely sub 4.5, and then just complete lack of explosion in the lower body. So he tested like a slot receiver, and he was drafted like a franchise, like a go-to running back. And you can see why something like that wouldn't work out. And I feel like the Rams have had a lot of picks like that recently that just they're guys that I don't know. Like it's like somebody in the room is vouching for this guy enough that they would take him 2 rounds ahead of where any other team in the league would take him. They did it with Rob Havenstein this year, Tavon Austin. Although a lot of people, for whatever reason, thought Tavon Austin was a top 15 pick that year, and in this case, Peed. And I think Brian Quick that same year. They took a guy with the first pick of the second round, a guy from Appalachian State. I don't know what you're thinking there.
Yeah, there's always those questions about like what do you see, like what are you doing, and a lot of times the NFL gets it wrong and we point to it and laugh. But let's be honest. I mean, we're all sitting here on a Wednesday night talking about this because, quite frankly, we're not any better.
No, it's a good thing we all have day jobs.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is like, I love talking about the NFL draft and I love breaking players down, but man, I'm not good at it. Like I just like for everyone like really good like I really like Cordy Glenn in 2012. Like that was one of my guys that I really liked. I really wanted the Cardinals to draft him at 13 instead of Mr. Michael Floyd, and people laughed at that. Like, oh, look, oh, you're dumb. Look, he went in the second round. Michael Floyd's gonna be a 5,000 yard receiver every year and catch 45 touchdowns a year, and now it's like, man, Jared Veldheer is a really good left tackle, and I'm glad we have him in Arizona now. But you can't tell me that wouldn't have been a good pick at 13 at the time, like for a team that had no offensive line talent whatsoever. So I don't know.
And then you turn around the following year, right? And you take Jonathan Cooper in the top 10.
That's right. Taking a guard at 7. Don't mess with it.
I think another takeaway from this series and just from scouting in general is anybody who's listening to the show tonight, when you're done listening, open up the list of the draftees from the 2012 draft, and once you get to about pick the 4th round and on of those picks, just count how many of those guys are not even with us anymore, not even in the league. These guys are doing something else with their lives, or they're playing in different leagues. We have to understand that when we are putting together the hottest of hot takes in Januaries and Februaries, we have to understand that a lot of the guys we're pounding the table for as a fifth round steal is just never going to see the light of day or never be more than a special teamer or a backup. It's the hard fact. And, like Seth said, when we do kind of, when the sun does shine on the dog's ass, it's not something necessarily that you want to go pounding your chest on, because we will look up your old board and find about 20 things that like my Russell Wilson, that you'll be embarrassed about.
Kyle, I appreciate you hanging out with us, talking a little bit about your misses in 2012, and kind of going through these big name guys, and as we talked about their misses, and what we're learning as we go through this. What are you up to right now? I know you're with Bolts from the Blue, but are you just taking some time off right now?
Yeah, man. Actually, tonight was the first night we had. So I coach. So tonight 7-on-7 started. So 7-on-7. That's where real championships are won on the perimeter. No, I'm just doing that, man. And yeah, just taking time out writing. I guess I don't really want to force takes. I don't want to be these guys that write fluff off-season pieces. So I mean, there's nothing really to write about now until training camp gets started. But that's about it. I don't want to be that guy who's scouting 24/7 in the off season just to have takes retweeted 6 months from now too.
Speaking of fluff off season pieces, I'm going to be writing some team previews over at Draft Break.
Yes.
over the next several weeks, because we've got about 75 or so days until college football season starts. So, my advice to anybody who's looking at tape right now, or really who wants to scout right now, is just make yourself a watch list. Maybe take a quick glance at a couple guys. Guys are going to change. Their roles are going to change. A lot of the things that we think we see this year or at this time of year are going to be completely different by the end of the year. So like Kyle said, you run the risk of having that take retweeted in January.
I will do it too.
Yes, sir.
The whole show's kind of built around that. So.
All right, guys, I appreciate it. Make sure you check us out on iTunes. We'll be back maybe next week, maybe the week after. I don't know. Guests are kind of finicky right now. They don't want to talk about the misses too much. I understand, though. It's also summer, and people are trying to get vacations in. So we'll get back with this, though. Kyle, appreciate it as always. Justin, have a good night. Go Warriors. Oh, wait. No, my bad.
Damn you. I thought we were going to get through the whole show without roll the montage. Roll the montage.
All right, guys. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.